Welcome back, beautiful beings of divine light, to the Luminary podcast. I'm your host, Annie Perry, professional psychic channel, quantum healer, all the things, just like you, multidimensional being. Very excited to be back on planet Earth. At least now I am. If you're not feeling too excited about being on Earth, no worries. I have had many of those days. But these days, I am feeling much more excited. It has been an incredible eclipse portal. So deeply transformative, especially if you have really strong cardinal sign placements. I'm a Capricorn sun. If you have really strong Scorpio or Taurus placements, I am a Scorpio rising. So definitely feeling the energy extremely intensely. I know a lot of you guys are as well, and we all feel it to different varying degrees. If you're not feeling it, that is, great too, because it means you're not going through the really deep, kind of heavy, tumultuous transformation, which there's always a plus and minus to being in either position. For me, the last 2 years, which is really what this final lunar eclipse is closing out, a 2-year cycle that we have been in of deep transformation for the cardinal signs, for wherever you have Taurus, wherever you have Scorpio in your chart. We are concluding those lessons. We are concluding that transformation. And that was really like the last 2 years exactly, since 2 Octobers ago, have been the most difficult, challenging years of my life. More challenging than when I was completely unconscious before my spiritual awakening. Just really hard. Hard and challenging. And it's almost like the more information you know, the more you just know that you are in it for the transformation, and that there is there's no cheat path, right? There's no quick way out of it. You have to go through the transformation. And I think for me, the biggest one has definitely been around a sense of personal power and not realizing how robbed of personal power I had been previously in my life, and how these last 2 years have taught me that was the main lesson, especially as a Scorpio rising. There is a huge potential to live a life feeling totally misunderstood as this very deep, intense, emotional water sign, as that being the main way that other people see and perceive you. So it's been incredible during these past 2 weeks to just go through kind of the final initiations into a more empowered energy, into deeper truth. And of course, that leading to me starting this series about the Galactic Wars, which is something I had talked about previously here and there, kind of hinted at it, but always kind of skirted around the Galactic Wars without getting too deep, because of the fear that I would invoke duality in the collective, in my community, which is not my intention. And I really had to become the kind of person that I am now to understand that my root core intention of unity consciousness cannot be shaken, no matter what it is that I am talking about. And the response to episode 1 of the Galactic Wars has been incredible. You guys have said, it's one of the most powerful episodes you've ever listened to. It was emotional. There were tears. There was a lot of revelations, a lot of activations, feeling the remembrance this story, and that's because you do. It is embedded in your DNA. You know these stories, and activating these stories in you will help you to make different decisions for the collective of humanity as we progress and evolve forward into the 4th density of consciousness. So as I was reflecting about the feedback on this episode, I was thinking about how much there was going on in the background, really, of this episode, how much I see and experience psychically when I am channeling. It's almost like there's a complete parallel story happening, and I wanted to bring that story to you. I wanted to tell you some of the things that I saw, that I witnessed, that I experienced while I was channeling the Lyrans for episode 115, the Lyran Legacy. This is really going to be a psychic analysis, just showing you what it is that I see, experience, and feel while I am channeling. And I also have separate conversations with them when I'm channeling. I ask them questions that they answer telepathically, but that does not always come out in what is spoken through me. And I think probably the visuals are also very potent, very powerful for me to describe, as a current 3D human being, for me to describe to you what it is that I see, because they are descriptive, but not in the same way that I would describe something. So before we get into it, I've got some announcements. The first one, very exciting. We are going to have a live Arcturian healing chamber on Saturday, October 28th, the day of the lunar eclipse. This is the closing of the gateway. The energy will, of course, have an echo effect for about the next 7 days, but it's the final eclipse of this really momentous season. I truly feel like the next time we are in the October eclipse season, next year, there will be a lot of progression and advancement towards disclosure. It's going to be like we have lived an entire lifetime in one single year. So we're not going to be the same when we come back to meet again. And I'm really delighted to co-create with my star family, my galactic family, the family that sent me here for this mission, and to bring you in a psychic activation to the Arcturian healing chamber. There are 5 master healers that are going to be working on us. They've already given instructions, directives for how to prepare. And then you just simply allow it and receive it. It's going to be incredible. I'm going to be transmitting messages throughout the healing from the Arcturians to you guys. And then I'm also going to be transmitting some of their light language, which is part of their healing process. The way that the Arcturians heal is unlike any other healing that I have ever experienced. They've been doing daily work on me, especially as I am attuning myself to continue telling this Galactic Wars story through channeling many different beings at many different points in time-space dimension. And as I get ready to, of course, facilitate the healing, hopefully this will not be the first and only. Hopefully it will be the first of many Arcturian healing chamber sessions. But the way that they heal is unlike anything else I've ever experienced. And the way that they describe it to me is that they rearrange the fractal geometry of your field for highest expression, highest truth, the truth of who you are, which is the I am consciousness, and they remove any of the entanglements and distortions in your geometric field. So you don't see this part of yourself, but I, as a psychic, see this part of yourself in your auric field and all throughout your body and the different layers of your body. There is all of this golden fractal geometry, and we can zoom in to every single fractal and see the geometry inside of it. And these are sacred geometric shapes, and they can become distorted. And that's what we experience as density, as limiting beliefs, as problem areas, as stuck areas of our lives. And so the Arcturians zoom in, they open the fractal, and they begin to work on the geometry, restoring it to perfect wholeness, to divine perfection. And then you get to, wake up the next day and start seeing and feeling changes in your life. And I've been feeling them left and right. It's been very, very incredible. I'll probably have to share more specifically about that on a different episode. But if you hear this after we have the live session, definitely get the recording. It's going to be somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes that they will be working on us. And of course, energy work knows no time, no space, no dimension. It is always going to move through your field when you are in the state of accepting it. Some of the other new things that have dropped is if you are wanting to work on your psychic gifts, if you want to activate one of your flames, if you want to begin psychic channeling, I have the blue and violet flame activations. Those would be intro for someone who just wants to dip their toes in, get an activation. You're either a blue or violet flame when you begin, and then you develop both flames. So naturally you are one or the other. Blue flame is going to be those who have more masculine energy, who are more of a warrior, galactic warrior, protector type. That's my flame. And then the violet flame is those who feel called to healing, energy healing, Reiki, all of those kinds of energy work modalities. Those are going to be a natural violet flame. And I have both of those linked in the show notes and in the description if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to take it even deeper than that, I recommend getting my level 1 psychic channeling workshop. It includes both flame activations, an entire channeling library, 5 modules where I teach you how to channel your spirit guides, angels, ascended masters, galactic families, pets, elementals, crystals. I mean, there's like nowhere, like I just can't stop. And that's the Arcturian in me, is like, let's just go pedal to the metal, full blast. So you can get the level 1 workshop, and it includes both flame activations, which is really, really kind of a powerful combination. And that is available through the link that takes you to wellspringofficial.com. The last kind of group event that we have got rescheduled. It was going to be the banquet, which is a social event for starseeds, light workers, luminaries, those who consider themselves light leaders, and you want to be in community with other light leaders and have very high level conversations about life and what's going on for you. Very real, no ego, no shadow, vulnerable sharing, talking, supporting each other in community. It is a virtual dinner party. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to, again, no ego, no shadow, just showing up as your true, authentic, vulnerable self, sharing about your life, your work, what you do, what's made you happy, what's made you sad. And those have been really the highlight of my year, is coming up with that idea and having the courage to execute it, inviting people from all over the world to a virtual dinner party, and we literally eat food. You can drink wine. If you don't drink, you can drink whatever it is that you do drink, and you can just be in community, and it's really so supportive. It's a different type of conversation than those that we are used to having in our previous fully 3D lives, right? We are 3D, 5D beings. And when you're in a conversation with those, you don't feel lonely. You don't feel like you're the black sheep. You don't feel like you're the odd man out. You feel like you can be your whole authentic, weird alien self, because all of us there are our weird alien self too. I love it. Anyways, the banquet for October has been moved to November 3rd. It is a Friday evening live, and you can get your seat reservation, again, through the link in the show notes, link in the bio, wellspringofficial.com. Hope to see you there. All right, let's get into it. I want to jump in to talk about some of the things that I saw while I was channeling the Lyrans. I kind of want to start at the beginning, actually, and kind of walk you through. So it's a parallel experience to what you listened to on episode 115, the Galactic Wars, the Lyran Legacy. Of course, we know now from listening to that we are the Lyran Legacy, that the human form was their creation. What they call the Adamic, as in Adam, the Adamic templates. Adam and Eve, kind of these prototypes that they would have created. On this episode, I want to encourage you, just like I did last time, that we gotta kind of let go of some of these childish beliefs that like a magical being showed up and like everywhere that they walked, flowers sprouted out of the ground. It's more complex than that. Of course, to us, it appears to be magic, but to our future selves in the 4th, 5th, 6th density, when we are creator beings ourselves, it's not magic. It's genetics, it's science, it's quantum physics, but we know all of that as mixed in with spirit, with energy. And we begin to bridge the etheric and the material worlds. So everything that exists in our world, including our bodies, all of the different races, the Earth is filled with all of these different races. It's all of these different creations. It's beautiful. And yet, of course, we always find reasons to think, this one or that one is better, or I wish I looked like that, or had this, or didn't. We have separation minds because we live mostly in the lower mind. But when you start to really allow yourself to think and to see from the upper mind, you will see that you are surrounded by all of these creations that have been brought to this planet to grow and to thrive and to literally be a living library, to be a place where all of these different collections of animals and plants and different races of the human species have been brought to grow and to thrive and to live together in community. We are incredibly diverse, and we have our star families and our future selves to thank for that diversity. The other thing I wanted to mention at the beginning is, if talking about the densities of consciousness was at any point confusing for you, I have an entire podcast episode called The 7 Densities of Consciousness. It's the 3rd episode I ever published. It's going to be on the Luminary podcast. It's not on YouTube. I might make a new one and put it on YouTube, but the old one is, Spotify, Apple, wherever you can listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find it. And that will explain to you all the 7 densities, how long, what types of body, the rate of vibration, and how we progress from one to the other. Because knowing the densities is actually kind of important for understanding that at some points in that conversation with the Lyrans, we were talking about things happening simultaneously or happening in their future or their past, but there was this overarching theme of simultaneous time, and that's what we exist in when we get into deeper densities of consciousness and higher in the dimensions. In the early part of the conversation with the Lyrans, we talked about the Elohim. I tend to say it with the accent, Elohim, so it's Elohim, however you want to say it. That's a Hebrew word and one of the words that used to be used for God. But the Elohim call themselves Elohim. And what it means to them is creator. And so they see themselves as the creators and kind of the stewards of the entire universe. So you can only imagine that we live in one galaxy of this universe. We're one planet out of infinite planets, and in one, part of our solar system, in one little part of the galaxy out of all of these infinite galaxies, and they oversee all of that. So you have to imagine for yourself that they are what we would think of as God consciousness, because they can be at many different places all at once. However, they do not call themselves God or Source. They still think of Source as their final merging. When they are done stewarding this universe and this universe comes to its conclusion, their energy will then merge with pure Source, and they will be at their, what they call the final breath, their final moment, the end of the song that is our universe, right? Universe, one song. And when our universe ends, that's when there will be Elohim created from the beings that grew in consciousness in this universe. So you and I will eventually be merged into this godlike consciousness being, and then we'll go on to create our own universe. But in simultaneous time, all of that already exists, right? It already exists. It messes with your mind a little bit, right? Because we have linear 3D minds, but it already exists. It's already happening. It already is. The first time I connected with the Elohim was actually exactly 1 year ago. So I have had the pleasure, the honor of channeling the Elohim, especially the Elohim of compassion. They tend to not really have names. I think one of them is like Estrella, which just means star, light. I mean, all of our names really mean like daughter of God, son of God, light being, because there are no names. And they even say that in the Law of One, there are no names. You don't need a name because you have an energy signature that's unique to you. It's more important than you having a name. A name is attached to an ego. So really the names just mean light, star, child of God, kind of these fluffy things that don't really mean anything. And so about a year ago, I connected with the Elohim. I was having kind of a transcendental experience, doing somatic work, breath work. I went into a psychic state, transcendental state, and the sun was shining into the room that I was in. This was exactly a year ago. Like, there's just no coincidences in our universe. Everything is perfect. Everything is divinely perfect. Happened in October of 2022. And I remember looking at the light, and then all of a sudden, the light of the sun started to speak to me. And it was this just overwhelming feeling of love and compassion and bliss consciousness. And it was like, everything is perfect. Everything in the universe is perfect. And at that time, it was a very difficult time in my life. And I was doing all of this somatic work to try to work through some of the really hard, deep things. But I just felt this wave of love. And I feel these waves when I'm channeling spirit guides, ascended masters, but this was like a deluge. This was like a tsunami. And I just felt like everything is perfect. Everything is exactly how it should be. And then the voice started to differentiate a little bit, and they said that they were the Elohim. I think it was a group of 3 that was talking to me at once, from the energy, from the light of the sun, or at least from the activation that I was receiving from the sun. And so I've been able to communicate with them and to some degree kind of start to understand how they operate in the universe. I do also have an episode where I channeled the Elohim of compassion to send some messages through. It's honestly, I don't remember what episode number it is, but it's on the podcast somewhere. So I share that because I want to give you more context as to who these Elohim creator beings are and what they were doing at the same time that we were receiving the story about the Lyrans. Is that the Elohim, even though the Lyrans felt that they were the original and only civilization, in Lyra, yes, they were, but the Elohim were busy in all of their places of this galaxy, planting these different seeds, these different templates, and they would get these seeds and these templates from the universe that they came from. That's where they get them, and they can infuse their own ideas and their own differentiations if they would like, but they create based on what they know, what they came from their universe. So there must have been some sort of feline cat-like species where they came from. And as you guys know, I work with the Arcturians. So at the same time that I was channeling the Lyrans and they were talking about their origin story, I was asking the Arcturians, like, where are you from? Where did you guys come from? Like, are you descended from these templates? And they said no, that we were also created shortly after the Lyrans by the Elohim. They were deposited in the Arcturus region, right? So there's Arcturus, the star itself, and then there are various different planets and stars around it, and they mostly occupy around the star Arcturus. But they were deposited there as well by the Elohim, and they said we had little to no interference in our ascension through consciousness and had nearly reached 5th density, or at least the catalyst for them to reach 5th density was their first interactions with the Draconian forces. So the Draconians did try to go after the Arcturians, At one point, probably way after they had been decimating the Lyran planets, because they always send out their scouts out around the universe. They try to create little stations where they can, assert their dominance. And so at one point, they kind of tried to go after the Arcturians, and the Arcturians were late fourth density, and they were like, well, this is our catalyst moment for how we can actually ascend into fifth density, which is the wisdom density, right? So when you're in fourth density, it's all about unconditional love and compassion, but then you have to get catapulted into the wisdom, which is actually sacrifice is love without wisdom. And they're like, we're not sacrificing ourselves for you Draconian forces. And so they were able to very quickly evolve and be able to go into fifth density. And then they had the upper hand over the Draconian forces. And that is why the Arcturians are called the shield of humanity, because they were able to evolve, to advance, to ascend into the next density, and therefore they had more access to higher and more advanced technology. Their ships are more advanced than the Draconian forces. That's what keeps them at bay, and the Arcturians look out for humanity, and I'm sure many other different younger species that need assistance. But that's why the Draconians don't try to fuck with them, because they're always the Arcturians are always like a step ahead, and they keep it that way, on purpose. They are also a more masculine species, whereas the Lyrans were very divine feminine species. And again, there's, benefits and there's hardships that come with either way that the polarity is swinging, as we all know. So at the same time that we're hearing the story from the Lyrans, it's not that things were progressing only linear. Things were always progressing at the same time. The Orion species was being developed, the Greys were being developed, and the Arcturians were, of course, developing and growing. But all of these species come out of third density thinking that they're alone, not knowing if there's anyone out there, and having to make these psychic connections with their guides, with their higher levels, and say, like, am I alone? Is there anyone else out here? And as we know from us having this experience right now, we are not alone. There are all of these different galactic families out there, but we happen to be further down further along on this great tree of growth and genetic descent in our galaxy. The other question that came up while I was channeling is, the Lyrans made a very strong point about the Elohim knew that this was a destructive species that was basically being exiled from their universe and being dropped off here. And so they made a point of saying that. And I asked them, do you blame the Elohim? Do you blame them for this happening? Or are you still kind of wondering, why did they allow it to happen? And the answer is they do not blame, but they do not feel any sort of shame at their level of consciousness of saying that, that they knew that this was a destructive force, still they allowed it, and the reason that they allowed it is for catalysts. If there is no dark energy, dark force in our universe, we would be growing our consciousness very, very slowly. We have to have catalysts. This is why the shadow exists, this is why the ego exists, this is why the mind exists. We need these catalysts in order to create friction so that we grow. And right at that moment, as I was having that kind of side conversation with them, I remembered that parallel lifetime dream that I had. I also shared it on the podcast. I'm sorry I can't remember which episode, but I talk about how it might be called parallel lives, actually. And even though all of our lifetimes in this universe are technically parallel, we can also have parallel lifetimes in other universes. So what it is essentially our soul signature placed in a different universe to see how we would react to all of those catalysts in that universe. Very interesting. I know it kind of bends your mind, but I had an experience where I asked my guides, like, do I have any parallel universe lifetimes? And what proceeded to happen is that I had a dream and I was in this parallel universe riding shotgun, which means you're not looking through the face of the being, you're actually looking over the shoulder of the being. So that's how you know you're riding shotgun with a different incarnation carrying your same soul signature. And we had dinosaurs in that world that I was in, but it was very cold. It was in the mountains and there were dinosaurs there. It was fucking crazy. But I remember feeling the fear there and the terror, and they had built up all of these military complexes to try to manage these dinosaurs, which were not the friendly, cute kind. They were like T-Rexes that wanted to eat us. And that memory came back to me as I'm talking to them about the Draconian forces being deposited here from another universe. And I was like, oh yeah, I bet I know which universe they came from, and hopefully my other self is doing a lot better now that they've been exiled over here. I don't know, simultaneous time, parallel universes. I hope they're doing okay. There could still be, though, different species that was created by the forces that were left there, left behind for whatever species is there to deal with as their own catalyst. So if we start to break down the Draconian forces, there are the dragons, and I'll talk about them more in just a second, but there are also like the 5th density beings, which tend to be very dark. I mean, think like Sauron level of darkness. And then there are like the Reptilians. Many people are familiar with the Reptilians being part of the Draconian forces. So there's the Dracos, and then which tend to be more dragon-like, and then there are the Reptilians, which tend to be more like what you think of as a reptile-like species. And the two things I want to say about them is, one, not all of them are service to self. Some of them are service to others. Some of them change. Some of them may have been service to self and decided, I don't want this anymore. And we have the free will to do that. And so they have changed and gone to the path of service to others. When it comes to the dragons, and the other interesting thing is just in the last 2 weeks, I've had contact from an entity called the Dragon Mother. And this is a very loving, benevolent, light being, but they were a dragon energy. There are many channels that work with the dragons, and these are essentially the higher selves of the Draconian forces that have transmuted to the light. So think like 6th and 7th density versions of the Draconians as these ascended dragon beings. We know from the law of one that you cannot continue on the path of service to self past 5th density. You have to make the quantum leap back to the light, because everything has to come back to source, and source's base frequency is love frequency. So you can only go so far down that path, and that, unfortunately, mostly 4th and 5th density beings are the ones that we deal with in a negative way, and are these beings that cause so much havoc in our galaxy. But the dragon beings themselves are these higher consciousness. They are back merged with the light. They have full understanding, full wisdom. And again, I think because of their past, they tend to be pretty neutral. They tend to be not as active. They're not trying to, become your spirit guide. They are really just offering help wherever they can, because they do have to increase their own polarity towards service to others. So they do reach out. I think that they probably tend to reach out more and are more active in other parts of our universe where maybe they don't have such a bad reputation. But they are not negative at all, and very loving. I was able to connect with the entity that called itself Dragon Mother, and it was just a mother energy, and it wants to support all mothers out there by giving them the strength that they need to do these incredibly difficult job of being a mother. But definitely not a coincidence that the first time I'm connecting with them is when I'm about to tell part of their story. Right? And so they're probably reaching out and saying, just remember, we actually do ascend to the light as I well know, but I'm glad that I had the opportunity to truly experience it for myself. The other species I wanted to bring up is the Blue Avians. And the avian beings, there are many different avian species, but the Blue Avian specifically came from another universe, and we know that at some point in the Lyran history, the Avians had contact with the Lyrans, and that DNA, portions of DNA were given to them. So we not only as a human species have ape DNA, but we also, and feline cat DNA, but we also have bird DNA, right? And that's a very simplistic way to put it when you're talking about very ascended beings and higher forms, higher light DNA. But we have that within us, within our genetic coding. We also have from the Syrians, which would be like a canine DNA. The Syrians created all of the canines that we know because they're honestly like our big brother. And they were like, we'll create man's best friend because we are your best friend. But nowhere in the channeling yesterday did the Lyrans bring up the Avians and how they had contact with the Avians. So I kind of went back and asked them some questions, and they said that yes, simultaneously, as they were aware there were other species, and as they were aware of the Elohim, who they were, and considered the Elohim as their spiritual guides, right? So at that point, they're in fourth density, they're developing their light body, they're vibrating faster, their DNA is also going through a transmutation process, they're no longer under quarantine in the third density. But what they said is that the Avians came to them after they had made contact with the Dracos, with the Draconian forces. The Avians came later, and it would have been somewhere in between the war starting or not, and the Avians being from a higher dimension. And I believe that they were fifth density, the ones that they were connecting with. They were able to probably see that there was about to be a conflict and were able to offer themselves as guides to the Lyrans should they need any assistance. But the Blue Avians are not like the Arcturians. They're not going to build a starship and battle and create the bigger, badder technology. They're very, very peaceful. They would rather, alight in their ship and kind of sail away from the conflict, offering benevolence and seeing that all things do work out and everything is brought back to the light. And that's just their nature. That's just how they are, and probably has to do a lot with the universe that they come from, which was probably more harmonious than this universe. This universe is known for being a little hectic, right? It's known for being a little hectic because of the five-fingered species that exist here. But back to the Avians, at some point after the Lyrans had made contact with Draconian forces, the Avians would have offered themselves from this higher density of consciousness as guides to give wisdom and also to give them some DNA strands that they were able to use in their genetic testing for the different human forms that they were developing. All right, I want to share something that I saw while I was channeling the early part of that episode when they were describing their third dimensional, third density, so 3D forms, which is what we are coming out of, right? Pre-2012, we were 3D. For the Lyrans, they mentioned we were in what you would consider like a cat form, but like a big cat. And so these beings would have looked similar to like lions, but they would have been massive. I mean, they were huge because you have to imagine the Lyrans are coming from a higher dimension. And so for them, small doesn't really register yet. And so these would have been very large beings, probably the size of a house. Huge cat-like forms that would have been self-aware. They would have been able to communicate. They would have had their own language, their own families, their own tribes, and they were left in peace on their planets for their entire third density, which is 75,000 years. It's actually very, very short, but they were left in peace, not like humans. We just got here, honestly, yesterday, 7,500 years ago. as the dominant species on this planet, which is just a drop in the water when you think of having 75,000 years to grow and evolve. So they would have started out in those kind of very large forms, and then they would have started to evolve, and realizing that being on all fours, having a paw, these things were not viable for creating, for stepping into the next phase of their evolution. So they would have started to evolve themselves out of those bodies into what we think of as the Lyran body, which is this very slender, tall, feline face, but looks much more humanoid than a giant lion does. So I found that part particularly interesting because it's not something we saw here on Earth, even though they teach us you evolved from an ape. And it's we did, but we did that over millions of years on totally different planets, under genetic testing, under higher density, higher dimensional beings. It wasn't just that would take forever and ever, which is why humans are a little confused about their origin stories. It's you have some of it right, it just wasn't on this planet. But I found it really fascinating to get to kind of see as they evolved from those all fours form and started to grow their own consciousness and realize that they could evolve out of that. Now, how do you do that? That's a great question. How would you evolve out of that? And this is where simultaneous time comes into play. So at the same time that you and I are having a 3D experience, we know that our higher levels already exist and are helping us right now. So at the same time that they would have had these lower consciousness incarnations into these large cat forms, at the same time their higher consciousness versions of themselves would have been creating the bodies and placing them on the planet and allowing the incarnative process to occur. That's how you evolve a species out of one form and into another form. We used to have a species on this planet that was like caveman style, right? That's kind of the template that we got originally. And I've even done a channeled reading for one of the souls whose galactic job, whose sole job is to go to different planets and see, is this species going to work? Do we need to make changes? And what I saw through her soul history was they had this kind of caveman-like species, and they were okay, we need to make it a little bit straighter, stand up a little bit taller, there was some issues with the brain size, they needed to rework that. And so that version of themselves is working on those different bodies, and then they allow the incarnative process to happen at the same time. It's a little confusing to think about at first, but if you just kind of allow your soul to digest that information, your soul knows exactly how that works, how that happens, how that occurs, because you are part of that process, and that process is happening for you and through you and by you at this very moment. So as we get ready for the next episode, and again, I'm channeling all of these the day of. I don't have a lot of information about where they're going to take me next. I just asked the question, what happened next? And they're telling me the story in linear format, which is also why some of this simultaneous stuff has been left out or not included. And so I think that might also be why they sent through the idea for me to do sister episodes for it, explaining what would have been happening simultaneously. So I want to paint the picture for you a little bit as we start to move towards Orion, right? We know that there was many, the Lyrans told me hundreds of thousands of years that they would have been in this conflict trying to save each planet from the Draconian forces. They would have had moments of peace before the Dracos got restless and started the conflict all over again. So it was very long, and it took them a long time to be able to give up their home and to accept that the Dracos had the power and the technology to destroy an entire planet. This is where the whole Star Wars idea of like the Death Star comes from, that there would be a piece of technology that had the ability to destroy an entire planet and to literally blip it out of existence. That kind of became the final straw when the Lyrans realized we don't have the tech to fight these beings. It would be better for us to save who we can and to begin an evacuation and to run. But this happened over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. Fourth density is very long, as is fifth density, also extremely long compared to our tiny, tiny little fractal of third density, which is only 75,000 years. So while that conflict was happening, we know that the Arcturians were evolving peacefully, developing themselves, that they had leaned more towards the divine masculine. We know that the Orion system was already being populated, probably by the Elohim, seeding different species there. We know that the Greys would have been developing themselves. We know that the human template had been taken from the Lyrans and had been developed in the Pleiades system and had also been developed in the Orion system. I don't have a clear picture of where exactly the Syrians were, and we know that later in the story, especially when it comes to humanity, the Arcturians are the shield of humanity, but their best friend and the best friends of humanity is the Syrians. So the Syrians play a huge role in our planet, in the story of our planet. They haven't revealed a lot, so I will wait for them to reveal how they want to step into the story and tell me, where they are from, what their development was like, because I think that that also matters. But over in the Pleiades, there would have been this human-like species developing themselves, leaning very strongly towards the light, almost to their own detriment, leaning towards the light. And we know these beings as our siblings almost. And I call them a lot of the times our future selves or our future humans, because so many of us are future Pleiadians, but because of simultaneous time, we are helping ourselves right now. And so we know that species as the Pleiadians. We will see if the Blue Avians make another appearance. I have had contact with them. I have clients who are from the Blue Avians. And hopefully some new species will make an appearance as well. Maybe the Mintankins, maybe the Mantis beings, or those from the Antares. We know of the Nordics. There's so many other ones out there. And they all have a story, a role, a point when they enter into this story. So I want you to imagine that we are moving away from Lyra, away from those planets after the evacuation, that the Lyrans are on the run. They are trying to find places where they can sustain themselves. They're getting guidance from other species about where they could potentially find new homes. We know that some of them went to Orion. We know that some of them went to the Pleiades. And I think some of them also went to Antares as well. But the group that interests me the most is the ones who went to Orion. They were what the Lyrans call the young commanders, right? So they would have already been descended from the Lyrans. They would have had a strong amount of pure Lyran DNA, but it also would have been heavily mixed with this Avian DNA, with the human DNA. The Lyrans wanted to develop themselves as more fierce, more strong, so that they could handle this enemy that was hunting them down. These are the young commanders. Some of you are those young commanders or are related to those young commanders. And your soul said, oh, hell no. Like, I'm not allowing them to go to the Orion system and do what they did to us. We are more knowledgeable. We are wiser. We are more fierce. We have that lion energy in us now. We have grown and evolved to be these fierce Lyran protectors. The Lyran commanders are the ones who took a group and went to the Orion system and said, even if we have to incarnate into third density, we're going to do everything we can to protect these planets from this darkness that is spreading across our universe. And that is where we are going to pick up the next episode, entering into third density in the Orion system, where these species, humanoid, almost elf-like like Lord of the Rings, these species believe they are alone in the universe. They are alone on their planets, and yet other species live there, cohabit with them, but they do not believe in any higher power. They haven't had any outside contact because they're deep in third density. They're deep under that quarantine. And just as these Lyran commanders begin to see the plan forming from the Draconian forces, they get the same idea. The Draconian forces are like, we will incarnate into third density beings, and that is how we will infiltrate and begin to conquer this planet before it has even gotten into fourth density and knows that it's not alone in the universe. And the Lyrans said, if that's what they're doing, that's what we will do too, and we will bring the light. Thank you so much, as always, for listening to this episode. I hope that it was illuminating. I hope it gave you even more insight and made you even more excited for the upcoming episodes about the Galactic Wars. Eventually, we will meet a young warrior named Hephaestus from another universe and follow their journey through the Galactic Wars all the way to Earth. Beautiful beings of divine light, you will see me on the next one.